What's up guys, this is Casey with another Blender tutorial for today. Today I want to talk about displacement. It's a very important feature when you're working with 3D models, especially when you're doing materials and you want your object to look a very specific way. The way I see it is that displacement can be used as almost a form of cheating, so that you don't need so much geometry in your object to obtain small amounts of detail. And there are a couple of ways that you can do displacements. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to do, is going to be the difficult way, or the way that is a little bit more taxing on your computer. So hopefully this doesn't crash my video capture software, because this takes a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. So I'm just going to start with this basic cube. Actually, you know what? I'm going to get rid of the cube, and we're going to use a plane. And I'm just going to size that up to the full length of my grid. Okay, so basically, in order to displace this, you'd come over here to your modifier tab, add modifier, and then you need to find displace right here. And you can see that it moved it off my grid. And now if I come down here into the modifier tab and it says texture new, I'm going to click new. Now it's below my grid. The reason for this is because it's trying to load in a picture or image that isn't there. So if I go over here to my textures tab, right here in my drop down box it says displace. That's the texture that's going to be used in my displacement. Right now it is set to image or movie, and that's actually what I want to use. However, you can see that if I use something like clouds, it gives me this picture here, which you can use this if you're looking for like a rocky surface or something like that. For today, we're going to use an actual image. So let's go back down to our image or movie, and let me open an image. Let's see, textures. What do I have? Let's go wood. I should have some in wood. And there's a displacement. Okay, let's do something like a bark displacement. I'll go back to my list view so I can see which one the displacement is. Insidious displacement right here. Now in order to use an image like this, or to get an image like this, I used Crazy Bump. It's a program that's free for 30 days where it basically just generates normal maps, occlusion maps, displacement maps. It does that automatically. You just mess with a few sliders. Hopefully I will get a tutorial for that up soon. I was going to today, however it doesn't seem like my Crazy Bump is wanting to work. So we're just going to mess with the actual displacement today. So anyways, you can see over here that it looks like basically bark. However, my object has not changed, and it will not change if I render it. That's because my object has absolutely no geometry inside of it. It has no vertices or polygons or anything like that except for the 4 in the corner. So it really has no shape that it can bend to. So it just basically looks like a plane. However, in order to improve that, all we have to do is tab into edit mode, click subdivide, and then select our number of cuts. So let's start out with 10, since that's the most it'll let you go just by clicking on the arrow. If I tab back out of edit mode, now you can see that my displacement is actually being applied. Now I'm going to hit Control A and apply the rotation and scale. That means that this image over here is going to be pretty much the exact size of my plane. Now right now it just looks kind of rocky and bumpy. This would actually be pretty good if you were just looking for, I don't know, a landscape like a grassy field or a hill, something like that in a project you're working on. You could smooth shade it like this, and you have little bumps and hills and stuff like that. That's good, but it does not make it look like our bark over here. So let's go back to flat shading. So obviously, we don't have enough geometry yet. So let's really increase it this time. Tab into edit mode, subdivide, and let's subdivide it by 60, which is a lot. Hopefully, it doesn't crash my computer. It did not, okay. And now I'm going to tab out of edit mode. And now you can see that we are getting a lot of detail. Whoo, buddy, that's a lot of detail. My computer is struggling right now. You can see how much it has actually displaced this. So obviously this is displaced. It's too much. Actually, before I get to most of this, I'm gonna Control Z and get out of this. I'm gonna tab back into edit mode, go to my top view, and I'm gonna unwrap it. So hit my U key, and I'm just gonna project from view. Now if I go into my compositing, and I find my image of bark, right about there, and I'm just gonna scale this up like this so that it matches my picture. And I'll go back to my default view and tab out of edit mode. So now right here in my modifier tab, where it says texture coordinate, I'm going to change that to UV. And you can see that my object changed. That's going to make a big difference. If I click on my UV map and click the one that, it should just be the default UV map, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now, let me tab back into edit mode, and let's subdivide that again by 60. And tab back out of edit mode. Now we get something that looks a lot more like bark. So let me go back to my picture over here. This is my picture, and this is what it looks like. This is fantastic. This is actually really detailed and looks really good. And the closer you get, the more you can start to see the geometry inside of it. So the more times you subdivide it, the more vertices that your object has, the more detail you're going to get. Unfortunately, the more you subdivide it, and the more you add things to it, add geometry to it, the more it's going to slow down your computer, because now we have 451,000 vertices, which is quite a bit. So most of the time, what you're probably going to do is, let me go back to 10. I'm hitting Control Z to go back to my 10 subdivisions. We can go back to our modifier tab, add a modifier, and go subdivision surface. Now because it's below my displacement modifier, all it's doing right now is making it smooth. However, if I move it above my displacement modifier, it adds more geometry. And if I set my viewport up, it adds even more geometry. So now let's go 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and let's not go any further than that because it looks like it's going to crash my computer. But you can see that we achieved pretty much the same effect, and we didn't even have to subdivide this object. So now I have this object here that looks like bark, and because it's slowing down my computer pretty drastically, it's nice because I can come over here and click on the little eye icon, and it immediately goes back to my 10 subdivisions, which is great. So now I can fluidly work on the rest of my project and not have to worry about this getting in my way. However, you need to note that when you apply this, it's still going to render with the same number of vertices, which means your rendering time will be slowed dramatically. So now that I've showed you how to do it that way, there's one other way that you can do displacement textures. And this way, it's not quite as good as the way that you see here. This is going to give you actual geometry, and you can make it pretty much as detailed or undetailed as you would like, which is very nice. And you can turn it on and off in your modifier tab. Now obviously, something I should have explained, I guess, before we move on, is that in this displacement tab, there's this value called strength. Usually you'll want to turn that strength down considerably in order to make it look a little bit more realistic and a little bit less rocky. So let me turn this down. It's going a little slow because I have my subdivision surface modifier on. Maybe about a 0.5. So this won't always work. Sometimes you'll want it to be 1. Sometimes you'll want it to be even greater than 1. In the case of this bark, you kind of want a lot of extra detail and a lot of deep crevices and a lot of bumps in your actual geometry. But if you're doing something like wood floors or plaster walls, you'll want to turn this way down, like a 0.01, just to get very tiny amounts of detail. So now that I've shown you that one, let's go on to the next one. I'm going to turn off my subdivision surface. Actually, I'm just going to... Okay, so now let me show you the second way of doing displacement maps. So I've reloaded my startup file. I'm just going to delete my cube and add in another plane. I'm going to scale it up to the size of my grid floor. And this way it does not cause you to add any extra geometry to your scene. So if I click on my plane, tab into edit mode, you can see that there are just the 4 vertices. I'm not going to subdivide. I'm not going to do anything special with this. Instead, I'm going to add a material in my materials tab. And then I'm going to go to my compositor and click on the little node button. So one thing I want to do first is I'm going to go to my top view and I want to hit U. Oops. I got to tab into edit mode, then hit U, and I'm just going to select project from view bounds. And then I can tab back out of edit mode. Now I'm going to add a texture, image texture, and let's open the same file we had before. Should be in wood, bark deciduous, displacement. Now I'm going to add a converter math node. And I'm going to put my image texture, the color value, into the bottom of my math node and change my math node to multiply. And I'm going to plug that into my displacement. Now to make sure that this is accurate, I need to add an input texture coordinate node and put the UV into the vector slot of my image texture. That's going to make sure that the unwrap that we just did is used when we do this image texture. Okay, so I'm switching back to my camera view and I'm going to go to my rendered view. So you can see that the plane doesn't look like it changed much. However, if you look really closely, and let's go to default view maybe for this, and let's view rendered view mode. So obviously we have a little bit of artifacting from the light. However, you can see that there's just a very, very slight edge, little bumps all over the plane. So let's go back to our compositor. And the way that we can make this more bumpy is by changing this value of our multiply node. So let's increase that. You can see as I'm increasing it that the plane is starting to get more and more bumpy. Now normally your value is never set this high. I use this when I'm looking in particular for small details. I usually don't use it for things like bark because it just doesn't make the same effect that you get from the other way that I showed you how to do displacements. But I have just made the bark displacement. So let me show you. Let me go back to my default view. And there it is. Obviously, it is not quite as pronounced as it was with the actual displacement modifier, but it is still here. You can still see it. It has made a noticeable difference. Basically, the difference between this displacement modifier is that this one requires geometry and actually moves the geometry to fit the picture. Whereas the compositing displacement, it's basically just playing with shadows. There's no actual changing of geometry going on. It just gives the illusion that there's geometry by putting in these little shadows and these little dark lines that make it look like there's something more to the object than there actually is. This is great when you're adding very small detail, but you don't want to increase the geometry or the vertice limits because it's going to slow down your render time and it's going to slow down your computer. So that's it. That's the two different ways. Well, I guess there's three different ways. I showed you three, didn't I? There's the adding the subdivision surface modifier, there's the subdivide modifier, or the subdivide of your geometry, and then there's the actual material displacement. So now you know basically how to make decent looking objects in Blender. It's just that easy. So the next time that you're actually modeling something, maybe stop and think to yourself, does this really need to be modeled? Do I have to model this by hand, or can I just use displacement? It's very, very useful, especially like I said with small details. So if you're modeling the side of a building or wood floors or something like that, let me show you. Let me go to Compositor. Let's open up a, whoops, I saved it. Let me open up a wood floor. Do I have wood floors here? Let's see. Wood floors, wood floors, wood floors. I have a couple. They're not great. What is that one? That's my specularity. Let's try this one. Boy, you can just barely see that one. Let's maybe set this all the way up to like 10. There we go. Go back to my default. Boy, that is real slight, but you get the idea. So, just like that. There we go, there we go, there we go. Now it's rendering in. Aha. So just like that, I have, in very few steps, I have made wood floor. I mean, you can see the wood grain, you can see the cracks, the lines in the wood. I mean, it's just that easy. For wood floors, I would recommend doing